My name is Kenta. In February 2008, I rented a small room in northern Japan, near the mountains, to finish a work project that needed silence and time. The town was already quiet when I arrived. Snowbanks pressed against buildings and narrowed the roads into pale corridors. The station was little more than a platform with a roof bent under ice. I chose the place because it was cheap and empty during winter. I planned to stay 2 weeks, finish the work, then leave. The building stood behind the main road, half hidden by piled snow. It had once been a storage structure and later converted into rooms for seasonal workers. The walls were thick concrete painted white many times over. The paint had cracked into thin lines like veins. Inside, the air smelled dry and faintly chemical, the way old refrigerators smell after being unplugged. The hallway lights buzzed and cast a weak yellow glow that never reached the corners. My room sat at the end of the corridor, closest to the slope that led up into the trees. The room itself was small and narrow. White walls, white ceiling, white floor tiles. No decorations, no carpet. The window was narrow and set high, half blocked by snow from outside. There was a single heater mounted low on the wall, an old unit with a metal grill and a slow fan. The bed was a thin mattress on a frame. A desk faced the wall. The door was heavy and sealed tight, with thick rubber around the edges. When it closed, the sound of the hallway disappeared completely. The first day passed without issue. Snow fell steadily, the kind that erases sound. I worked until evening, ate packaged food, and slept early. The cold was constant but controlled. The heater ran often, clicking on and off. The room stayed dry and still. The second night, the snow intensified. By then the town had shut down. I checked the road conditions online and saw warnings about closures. Power stayed on, but the wind rose and pressed against the building. The walls made faint ticking sounds as they cooled. Around midnight, I woke from shallow sleep with the sense that someone was standing close. The room was empty. The heater had turned off, and the air felt sharper. I lay still and waited for my breathing to settle. That was when I heard the knock. It came from the door. Not loud, not urgent, just a dull, careful sound, as if someone were wearing gloves and tapping with their knuckles. 3 taps, evenly spaced. I waited, listening. The building stayed silent. I assumed it was the wind causing pressure changes. The hallway doors sometimes shifted when the temperature dropped. I lay back down. A minute later, it happened again. 3 taps. This time I noticed something else. Beneath the sound, there was a faint noise, thin and drawn out. It could have been air moving through a crack, or the heater pulling from the outside vent. It had a shape to it, rising and falling. My half-asleep mind tried to turn it into meaning. I forced myself to focus on the physical sounds. I got out of bed and opened the door. The hallway was empty. The lights buzzed. No footprints disturbed the thin dusting of snow that had blown in near the entrance. I closed the door and locked it, feeling foolish. I slept the rest of the night with the light on. The next day the roads closed fully. The snow piled higher against the building, blocking the lower part of the window. The landlord lived in another structure closer to the road. I did not see anyone else. I worked, paced, ate, and watched the light fade early in the afternoon. The quiet felt heavier than before. The room held cold even with the heater running. The white walls reflected light back at me, flattening everything. That night, the knock returned. It came later, close to 2 in the morning. This time I was awake, lying still, listening to the heater cycle. The knock sounded exactly the same. 3 taps. Careful. Measured. After it stopped, the faint sound followed again. It reminded me of breath drawn through clenched teeth. Slow. Uneven. The noise seemed to shape itself around my name, not clearly, but enough that my mind filled in the rest. I sat up, heart racing, and waited for it to stop. It did not continue. The silence afterward felt worse. I did not open the door. I did not sleep. The pattern repeated the following nights. Always late. Always 3 taps. Always the thin sound that followed, hovering at the edge of recognition. Each time I woke before it happened, as if my body learned the timing. My sleep shortened. My head ached. The room felt colder, no matter how long the heater ran. I noticed that the metal desk legs were always cold to the touch, even in the afternoon. The floor tiles felt chilled through my socks. By the 4th day, the isolation began to affect my sense of time. Snow sealed the exits completely. The town disappeared under white. I tried to distract myself with work, but my focus slipped. I became aware of the room itself. the thickness of the walls, the lack of sound, the way the door sealed so completely that pressure built when I opened it. When I placed my palm against the wall, it felt colder than the air. I checked the heater closely. It pulled air from a vent that ran through the wall. When it switched on, the vent made a low whistle. When it switched off, the air inside the room seemed to shift. At night, when the temperature outside dropped further, the unit ran longer. The vent noise changed pitch. On the 5th day, I went to the landlord's building during a break in snowfall. The walk was difficult. Snow reached my knees. The cold bit into my face. Inside, the air was warmer and smelled of fuel. The landlord explained the history of the building in practical terms. During heavy winters in the past, when roads closed and deaths occurred, bodies had been stored in the structure to keep them preserved until transport was possible. The rooms had been modified later, but the original insulation remained. The walls had been designed to hold cold. That information stayed with me. It gave the room a purpose I had not considered. The design choices made sense. The thickness, the seals, the lack of windows. I told myself that the sounds had explanations. Air pressure, vents, my own fatigue. That night, the knocking felt closer, sharper. The sound after it stretched longer. I noticed something new. The heater shut off just before the knock. The room fell silent, then the taps came. When the heater turned back on, the thin sound blended with the vent whistle and disappeared. I lay there, counting my breaths, watching the heater light cycle. By then, my body was reacting before my thoughts. My hands shook. My mouth stayed dry. I stopped turning off the light. The white walls reflected the bulb's glare and left no shadow deep enough to hide anything, yet I felt exposed. The room offered no variation, nothing to anchor me. On the 7th night, I did not wait. When the knock came, I got out of bed and opened the door immediately. The hallway was empty again. The air outside the room felt warmer, even though it should not have. The silence pressed against my ears. I stood there too long, listening for movement that never came. The realization formed slowly and settled with weight. The sound was not coming from the hallway. It was coming from the walls, from the vent system that connected the rooms and the exterior. When the heater shut off, cold air rushed through the channels. The pressure changes caused the walls to contract. The vent produced tones that my exhausted brain shaped into something familiar. The knocks were the structure itself responding to temperature shifts, the metal and concrete adjusting. The timing aligned with the heater cycle. The pattern was consistent. Knowing this did not help. My body did not accept the explanation. Each night, the anticipation grew. I stopped sleeping entirely. My thoughts slowed. Simple tasks took effort. I felt watched by the room itself, by its purpose, by the cold it was designed to hold. On the 9th day, the weather report showed a break coming, but the roads remained closed. I understood then that staying longer would damage me in ways I could not easily repair. The project no longer mattered. I packed my bag with only essentials: warm clothes, food, water, headlamp. I left a note explaining my departure. I stepped outside before dawn. The snow had hardened overnight. The sky was pale and empty. The path toward the main road was buried, but the route toward the lower valley was passable with effort. I walked for 5 hours through snow that burned my legs and numbed my face. My breath fogged and froze on my scarf. Each step grounded me in movement and pain that felt real and necessary. As I descended, the air grew warmer. Sound returned slowly. Wind in branches. Distant water. When I reached a road that had been cleared earlier, I felt a release I cannot fully describe. My body relaxed all at once, leaving me shaking. Later, with rest and normal sleep, the memories settled into order. The knocks had always matched the heater cycle. The sounds had followed predictable temperature drops. Isolation, cold, lack of sleep, and a room designed to preserve bodies had combined into something my mind could not handle. There was no person at the door. No voice. Only a building doing what it had been built to do, and a tired mind trying to survive inside it. I never returned to collect the rest of my belongings. I did not need them. The white room remains, sealed in snow each winter, holding cold, waiting in silence. February 2015 had been colder than usual, the kind of cold that settles into your joints before you step outside. I worked road maintenance then. Plows, salt spreaders, night shifts that blurred together until days lost their names. The work was simple and physical. Keep the roads open. Keep people alive. I liked the routine because it didn't ask questions. You showed up, you drove, you cleared snow, you went home. Most nights passed in a steady rhythm of headlights, gauges, and the low grind of steel on asphalt. That night started like any other. A winter storm had been forecast to sweep through the region, fast-moving and heavy. Snow bands were supposed to roll east before morning. I clocked in just before dusk, checked my truck, filled the hopper with salt, and rolled out. The sky was already thick and gray, the air sharp enough to sting inside my nose. By the time full dark settled, snow was coming down hard. Visibility dropped to a few truck lengths. The road reflected my lights in a flat, endless white. My assigned route ran through a long valley that cut between two ridgelines. It was rural, mostly farms and state land. No streetlights. Few houses. The kind of place where weather felt louder. I drove into the valley just after 10. Snow was coming down sideways, pushed by wind that whistled through the cab seals. I plowed steadily, watching the blade throw snow to the shoulder, watching the salt spinner spray a dull arc behind me. After my first pass, I turned around and headed back through the valley. That's when I noticed the mile marker. It was bent, knocked over, half buried in snow. I remembered it because I had reported it weeks earlier after a car slid off the road. The marker leaned at an angle, its number barely visible under grime. Seeing it again made sense. I was retracing the same stretch. A little farther along, my headlights picked up a dead deer on the shoulder. It lay stiff on its side, legs folded wrong, snow piling along its spine. One antler was snapped. I slowed without thinking. Roadkill was common, but something about the way it was half buried caught my eye. It looked like it had been there a while, frozen in place, becoming part of the landscape. I finished the loop and turned back again. The storm didn't let up. Snow stayed heavy, wind steady. The radio crackled now and then with static and distant traffic from other districts. Nothing unusual. I passed the mile marker again. Same angle. Same smear of rust. Then the deer. Same position. Same broken antler. The snow on it looked undisturbed, like it hadn't taken on any new accumulation. I told myself it was nothing. The valley wasn't long. I was running tight loops. In snow like that, everything looked the same. Landmarks blended together. I focused on my gauges, my speed, the feel of the blade. Hours slipped by. My body fell into the trance that night driving brings, where thought narrows to a tunnel and time stretches thin. Around midnight, I noticed a broken fence post on the right side of the road. It stuck out of the snow at a sharp angle, wire hanging loose. I remembered it because it sat close to the shoulder. Too close. I had clipped it once before with a wing plow and bent it farther down. Seeing it again triggered that memory. I adjusted my line without thinking. I turned at the end of the route and came back through. The mile marker was there. The deer was there. The fence post was there. All of them in the same order, spaced the same way. I checked my GPS. The screen showed my position moving, tracking my path. The miles ticked by. Fuel burned. Engine hours climbed. Everything said I was moving forward. The storm cell didn't shift. Snow stayed thick, swirling in tight circles in my headlights. Usually storms drift. Bands thin out. Wind changes direction. This one sat heavy over the valley, like a lid. The ridgelines on either side vanished into white walls. I couldn't see beyond the road edges. By 2 a.m, unease crept in. Not panic, just a steady pressure behind my eyes. I started paying closer attention. I noted the small dip in the road before the mile marker. The shallow curve after the deer. The way the fence post leaned toward the road. Each pass, they appeared exactly the same. No new tire tracks. No change in snow buildup. Even the plow ridges on the shoulder looked identical. I slowed and studied the deer as I passed. Its eye reflected light, glassy and dull. Snow clung to its flank in a smooth layer, not fresh flakes. It looked preserved. When I came back again, it looked unchanged. I started to feel like I was driving through a photograph. The radio stayed quiet except for static. I adjusted the volume, then lowered it. The cab felt smaller. The sound of the engine grew louder. My breath fogged the windshield edges faster than usual. I cracked a window and cold air knifed in, sharp and clean, grounding me for a moment. At 3:32 a.m., the radio broke through the static. It wasn't a general call or weather update. It was my name, spoken clearly, as if someone had keyed up just for me. Hearing it made my stomach drop. My name didn't belong on that channel unless dispatch was checking in or another unit needed something specific. I grabbed the mic without speaking. My hand shook enough that I noticed it. The radio stayed silent after that one transmission. Static filled the gap. I waited. Nothing else came through. I tried to reach dispatch, following protocol, keeping my voice steady even though my heart was racing. The response came back after a delay, calm and routine, stating that I was the only truck on shift in that district and that no other unit had called me. I sat there for a moment with the truck idling, snow piling against the blade. My breath sounded loud in my ears. I looked down the road ahead. The white tunnel stretched on, featureless. I told myself the radio glitch had picked up interference from another region, or an old recording, or bleed-through. Radios did strange things in bad weather. I put the truck back in gear and drove on. The mile marker appeared. The deer. The fence post. The same order. The same spacing. I felt trapped between the windshield and the memories piling up in my head. My mind started filling gaps with worst-case explanations. I fought that by listing facts. I was awake. The truck was running. The GPS showed movement. Fuel was burning. Time was passing. Still, the storm didn't move. 12 hours, according to later reports, that cell sat over the valley. At the time, it felt endless. I checked my watch every few minutes. Seconds crawled. Minutes stretched thin. The clock advanced, but the road refused to change. I finally pulled over near the deer and shut off the blade. Snow swallowed the front of the truck almost immediately. I stepped out into the wind. Cold hit me hard, stealing my breath. The sound outside was muted, thick, like the world had been wrapped in insulation. I walked to the deer. Snow crunched under my boots, leaving deep prints. I stood over it and looked closely. The eye was cloudy. The fur was stiff with ice. There were no fresh tracks around it. No signs of scavengers. It had been dead long enough to freeze solid, long enough to become part of the roadside. I looked back at the truck. My footprints led from the door to where I stood. They were the only ones. The road behind me showed my tire tracks, clear and sharp, leading back into white nothing. Ahead, the road disappeared the same way. I got back in the cab and drove. Something shifted after that. Not the storm. Not the road. Something inside me settled into a cold acceptance. I stopped expecting change and focused on finishing the shift. I logged my passes. I reported conditions. I followed procedure like muscle memory. Near dawn, the light began to creep in, thin and gray. With it came a change so subtle I almost missed it. The snow lightened. Wind eased. The white walls pulled back just enough to reveal the ridgelines again. The valley released the storm like it had been holding its breath. When I passed the mile marker this time, it was farther down the road than I expected. The deer was gone, replaced by a dark stain and churned snow. The fence post lay buried, barely visible. By the time my shift ended, I was exhausted in a way sleep didn't fix. Later investigation explained parts of it. The valley's shape trapped the storm cell, slowing its movement. My repeated loops and the uniform conditions created a perception loop, landmarks appearing identical because nothing changed around them. Fatigue played its role. Night work warps the brain. The radio call was traced to cross-channel interference, a garbled transmission that happened to resemble my name. All of it made sense on paper. None of it erased the feeling of being caught in a place where time folded inward. I quit 2 weeks later. Not because of fear, but because I couldn't shake the image of that road refusing to move, of driving forward without going anywhere. I took a job with regular hours, daylight work. Sometimes during heavy snow, I still think about that valley and the storm that stayed put, and I remember how easy it was to lose trust in the simple fact of progress. I went into the backcountry that January because winter makes people honest. Most stay home. The few who don't leave clear signs. I wanted the quiet and the certainty. I planned the route with care, marked bearings on a paper map, and logged distances in a notebook. No loops. No shortcuts. I used a cheap GPS watch only to confirm what I already knew. The forest was state land in northern New England, open, unmanaged, miles of hardwoods and pine with old logging cuts that had healed into tight growth. Snow had fallen 2 days earlier and then stopped. The cold held it in place. Every mark stayed sharp. I parked at a plowed turnout just after dawn. The air burned my nose. The sky was a hard blue with no clouds. I strapped on snowshoes and moved in, slow and steady, counting steps, watching my compass, keeping the sun at my left shoulder. My pack was light and tight. Tent, tarp, stove, food for 2 days, a folding saw, a hatchet. I didn't bring a firearm. I didn't think I needed one. By mid-morning I reached a small rise above a frozen stream and chose a campsite I had used before. It sat on a flat bench with spruce to block the wind. I stamped a platform, set the tent, and dug a shallow pit down to mineral soil. I built a small fire, fed it with wrist-thick sticks, and warmed my hands while melting snow. The smoke went straight up. The woods felt empty in the good way. After lunch I doused the coals, stirred the ash until it was gray and dead, and packed up for a day hike. I left the tent standing. I hung food high. I checked the watch and noted the time. I moved north along a ridge, then cut east across a saddle, then south to a long spur that dropped toward the stream. I kept the pace even. I stopped only to mark features in my head. A lightning-split birch, a boulder with lichen like dried paint, a fallen hemlock with roots frozen midair. My tracks ran clean behind me, 2 ovals per step, even spacing. No other tracks crossed them. Not human, not animal. Rabbits left dots. Deer left heart-shaped prints. Coyotes left a neat line. I saw none of that. The light faded early. By late afternoon the cold deepened, and the shadows went flat and blue. I turned back on the same bearing, matching the steps, watching my old prints appear and slide under my feet. When the bench came into view, I smelled smoke. At first I thought it was my clothes. Will hold scent. Then I saw a thin column rising through the spruce. I stopped and stood there long enough to feel my pulse in my throat. The fire pit sat where I had left it. The stones were blackened the same way. The ash had been disturbed. A few sticks lay on top, glowing dull orange. Heat shimmered above them. I could feel it on my face. I hadn't been there for hours. I knelt and held my palm near the stones. Warm. Not leftover warmth. Active. I pushed a stick aside with my hatchet. Red showed underneath. I backed away and scanned the trees. The forest looked the same. No movement. No sound beyond a faint tick as sap froze. My tent stood untouched. The guy lines were tight. The snow around the pit was trampled. The impressions were wrong. They weren't boot prints. They weren't paws. They were long and narrow, shallow grooves pressed into the snow, paired, with a faint ridge between them like something dragged. They circled the pit and ran downslope toward the stream, then curved back and ended near the tent. The spacing suggested a gate, but not one I could match in my head. Each mark was too even, too deliberate. The snow between them was scuffed smooth, as if weight had slid rather than stepped. I followed the marks for a few yards and stopped. The grooves crossed my old tracks without breaking them cleanly, smearing them instead. Whatever made them had moved after I left. I stood up and felt small in a way that had nothing to do with size. Someone had been there. Someone had fed my fire. I checked the time again. The watch hadn't drifted. I walked the perimeter, slow, careful, scanning trunks and gaps. No fresh breath clouds. No snapped twigs. No smell beyond smoke and cold sap. I considered packing up and leaving in the dark. The road was miles away. The stream crossing would be risky after sunset. The wind was rising. I did what fear told me not to do. I stayed put and watched. I let the fire burn down to embers and then buried it deep, stirring until no color showed. I brushed the snow smooth with my gloved hands and erased the marks as best I could. My hands shook from more than cold. I reset the camp like it was new. Then I climbed. 10 yards behind the site stood a beach with a low branch scarred by old steps. Someone had nailed a ladder there years back and removed it. I strapped on my spikes, slung the pack, and hauled myself up into the crook where 2 branches split. I rigged the tarp as a windbreak and tied in with webbing. I kept my headlamp off. The moon rose thin and bright. I didn't sleep. I watched my campsite the way you watch a road after a near miss, waiting for something to come fast out of the dark. The cold pressed in. My breath fogged and drifted. Every sound had weight. Snow shed from branches with soft sighs. Once far off, I heard ice crack along the stream. Sometime after midnight, the forest changed. I felt it before I saw anything. The sense of space tightened, like a room filling with people. The air carried a smell I hadn't noticed before, sharp and sour, mixed with smoke. Down by the pit, snow shifted. Long grooves formed again, slow, steady, as if something heavy was pulled across the surface. The marks moved around the circle I had smoothed, careful, methodical. No steps, No pause. The tent fabric whispered as it was brushed. I stayed still. My fingers went numb. I counted breaths and kept my eyes open until they burned. The marks drifted away toward the stream, then returned. A shape passed through the trees, low to the ground, too dark to separate from shadow. It didn't look up. It didn't rush. It moved like work. When it reached the pit, the ash shifted and a faint glow appeared, then faded as if covered again. I never saw hands. I never heard speech. I never heard feet. By dawn the cold was brutal. Light crept in, and the forest returned to its normal distances. I waited until full day before climbing down. The campsite looked used. The pit had been uncovered and covered again. The snow showed fresh grooves layered over my erasing, cleaner now in the light. They ran to the stream and back. Near the water, the marks changed. They grew deeper, then broke into irregular pits where ice had cracked. I packed fast and left without breakfast. I followed my original route out, not deviating, not stopping. When I reached the road, relief hit so hard it made me dizzy. I didn't report anything right away. I went home and let the images settle. Then I did what I should have done first. I called the regional office and asked about winter operations near that tract. They transferred me twice and finally put me on with a ranger who had been there for decades. I didn't tell him my theory. I described the marks. I described the fire. He told me about a man who lived off-grid along the stream for years, squatting in a collapsed logging camp a mile downstream. The man hauled traps and scrap on a sled made from an old door. In winter he moved at night to avoid contact. He dragged loads behind him, which left long paired grooves with a ridge. He fed fires others left because it saved matches and time. He slept low and moved slow because his legs were damaged from frostbite years earlier. He had been warned off the land the previous fall. No one knew where he went. The explanation fit every detail that mattered. It didn't make me feel better. It made the forest smaller. I haven't solo hiked in winter since. When I think about that night, I don't think about being watched from the dark. I think about shared heat. About how someone found my fire and made it theirs, quietly, carefully, without a word, while I waited above, listening to the snow change under weight that wasn't mine. February 2018 sat at the edge of a long, cold stretch where winter stopped feeling temporary. Snow had been on the ground since December and never fully left. The lake was 30 miles out, past the last cluster of houses, down a county road that narrowed into packed dirt. I had driven by it in summer once and remembered a small boat ramp and a rusted sign. That night the sign was buried and the ramp was just a white slope into nothing. We liked that lake because nobody went there when it froze. No shacks, no tracks, no glow from town. On Google Maps it showed as a white shape with no name, like the software had given up on it. There were 4 of us, because that was how many fit in the truck. We left after work, still wearing the smell of oil and cold metal on our clothes. The drive felt longer than usual. Snow ate sound. The headlights flattened the road into a tunnel. When we parked, the lake looked solid and calm, the kind of surface that makes you trust it without thinking. The wind was light but steady, pushing loose snow across the ice in thin sheets. We walked out with our gear spread across sleds, following no trail because there wasn't one. The ice sang the way ice always does when weight settles on it, sharp pings that carry far. I checked thickness with the spud bar every few steps. It was thick enough everywhere I checked. The lake felt empty in the way places feel empty when nothing has touched them in a while. We set the tent in the middle of the basin where the depth dropped fast. The fabric snapped as we staked it down. Inside, the world shrank to a circle of dull light and the steady hiss of the heater. We drilled holes in a straight line, the auger biting clean and steady, dark water blooming up around the blades. The ice smelled like minerals and cold iron. We dropped lines and waited. Hours passed in small movements. Adjusting gloves, checking the heater, looking at the clock without caring about the time. Outside, the wind rose and fell. The tent walls bowed and relaxed. At some point it was after midnight. The lake felt farther from everything then. The kind of distance that presses on your ears. The first hit came from below, not sharp but heavy, a blunt force that ran through the ice and into my boots. The auger, lying flat near one of the holes, jumped and rolled an inch. The tent shook as if someone had kicked it. Snow slid down the walls. My first thought was pressure. the way ice shifts when temperature changes. It happens. We all knew that. The second hit came a few seconds later, harder, closer to the line of holes. The sound was wrong for cracking. It was a solid thud, followed by a low vibration that faded out instead of snapping off. The third hit wasn't under us. It was a few yards away, outside the tent. I felt it through the ice more than I heard it. The vibration traveled, reached us, and stopped. That was when it stopped feeling random. The hits had spacing. Not even spacing, but intention. They moved. I listened harder then, holding still, trying to separate the normal lake noises from whatever this was. The ice ticked inside. The heater hissed. Under that, there was something else. A dragging sound, muted and deep, like a heavy object being pulled along the underside of the ice. It passed beneath one hole, then another, then moved on. I checked the ice near my feet for cracks. There were none. The surface was clean. Snow around the holes lay undisturbed. The lines hung straight down, not pulled, not twitching. Another impact came closer again, right beneath the tent floor. The stakes creaked. The tent frame flexed and settled. The heater wobbled. Snow sifted down in a fine dust. I thought of ice heaves, the way lakes can shift when pressure builds, but those sounds are long and tearing. This was localized. Focused. It came, stopped, moved, and came again. Each time it seemed to test a new spot. Time stretched. Minutes felt thick. I tried to picture what was under us. Large fish can bump ice, but they don't pace. They don't move with that weight. Beavers live in some lakes, but this lake had no visible huts, no chewed banks. Otters travel, but their movements are quick, sliding, not heavy enough to shake steel. The dragging sound returned, slower now, circling. The ice under one tent leg made a sharp crack, not a full fracture, just a warning snap that echoed outward. The leg shifted a fraction. That sound broke whatever calm I had left. The cracking didn't spread. It focused. Hairline fractures radiated from a point near the leg, visible through the thin layer of snow. They stopped after a foot, then another snap formed beside them. The ice was under stress, not breaking apart, but being pressed from below. I understood then that something was rising. Not through the ice, but against it. Pushing upward, testing thickness. When it moved, the pressure moved with it. When it paused, the ice relaxed. I didn't think about packing gear. I thought about distance. I thought about the truck and the dark line of shore. I thought about how far the cracks were from the holes we had drilled and how those holes were weak points, thin spots waiting to be used. The pressure surged again, directly under the tent's center. The auger jumped a second time and spun on its handle. The holes burped water, a thin film spilling out and freezing as it spread. The ice made a sound like a deep breath being forced out. We ran. Not carefully. Not with balance. We tore out through the tent door and left it standing. The cold slapped hard, sudden and clean. The dark was wide and flat. I ran toward where I thought the truck was, my feet sliding, catching, sliding again. Behind me, the ice cracked once more, louder, closer to the surface. I didn't look back. I felt the vibrations chase us for a few steps, then fade as the pressure shifted away. The shore came up fast, trees appearing out of nothing. The truck was a dark block against the snow. I didn't stop running until my hands hit metal. We piled in, breath tearing at our throats, and drove with the tires spinning until they caught. The drive back felt longer than the drive out. No one slept. The heater blasted. My boots steamed. I kept replaying the pattern of the impacts, the way they moved with purpose. By the time the sky started to lighten, the explanation had settled in my head, heavy and plain. That lake sits in a bowl with steep sides. In winter, thick ice locks it in place. When temperature drops fast, the ice contracts. When it warms even a little, it expands. On large lakes, that pressure releases in long cracks and ridges. On small, deep lakes with uneven bottoms, pressure can trap pockets of gas and water under the ice. Methane builds up from decaying plants. Water shifts under pressure from inflow and springs that don't freeze. When that pressure moves, it can travel like a wave, pushing up where the ice is weakest. We had drilled holes in a line, thinning the ice in a neat pattern. We had set a tent over them, trapping heat. The heater warmed the ice just enough to change how it held stress. Under us, pressure found a path. It rose, hit, moved, and tested again. Not alive, but active. Not random, but following the rules of force and release. The next day I drove back alone in daylight. I stopped at the shore and walked out a short distance. The tent was gone. Not torn, Not half sunk, just gone, likely blown flat and buried by drifting snow after we left. The holes were gone too. Where they had been was smooth ice, polished by melt and refreeze, covered by a thin skin of new snow. No cracks. No marks. The lake looked untouched. I stood there longer than I needed to, listening to the quiet. In the light, it was easy to tell myself nothing had been there with us, that it was just winter doing what winter does. That explanation fit. It accounted for the force, the movement, the timing. It explained why the lake looked empty again. What stayed with me was how deliberate it felt in the dark, how pressure can imitate intent when it has nowhere else to go, how easy it is to stand on something solid and forget that it is always moving slowly under you, waiting for the right conditions to push back. I went up north in January 2013 because my uncle let me use his old cabin during the off-season. It was cheaper than therapy and quieter than my apartment. I told myself I needed the cold, the distance, the effort it took just to exist up there. The cabin sat alone near a frozen lake that no one bothered naming anymore. It was a flat, white bowl surrounded by black trees. The road in was a narrow plow cut that ended half a mile before the cabin. From there, you hauled what you needed by sled. The place had been built in the late 70s. It smelled like old pine, fuel oil, and mouse droppings baked into the wood. The windows were small and thick, fogged at the edges. The front door faced the lake. The back opened toward the trees. I arrived in late afternoon under a sky the color of dirty wool. The cold had a weight to it. Every breath felt measured. I unpacked slow, stacked wood, lit the stove, and watched the cabin come back to life inch by inch. The walls popped as they warmed. The silence pressed in once the wind dropped. By night, the lake had vanished into the dark. No lights anywhere. No road noise. No aircraft. Just the stove ticking and the occasional groan of ice settling. I slept on the couch because the bedroom felt sealed off, too far from the door. I woke up a few times to the sound of the wind moving snow off the roof. Nothing else. The second night was colder. The stove worked harder. I read until my eyes burned and shut the lamp off around 11. I lay there staring at the ceiling, listening to the quiet rearrange itself. At about 11:40 p.m., I heard an engine. At first, it made sense. Snowmobiles cut across frozen lakes all winter. The sound was distant and flat, the way noise travels over ice. I waited for it to pass. Instead, it got closer, then changed pitch. Slower, like someone easing off the throttle. The sound moved from the lakeside toward the trees, then back again. It circled the cabin once. I sat up, heart steady, trying to map it in my head. I went to the window. There were no lights. Not even a glow. The sound came again, closer now, but still wrong. It didn't rise and fall like a normal machine. It had a dragging quality to it, like metal scraping over packed snow. The engine never revved. It just held this low, uneven growl. I stood there for a long time with my hand on the glass. The sound looped the cabin again, wider this time, then tighter. I expected to hear a door slam or footsteps crunching. Nothing followed. After the third loop, the engine cut out. Not faded. Stopped. The quiet after felt heavier than before. I waited for the engine to start again. It didn't. I waited for another sound. There wasn't one. I didn't turn any lights on. I stayed where I was until my legs went numb. Eventually, I lay back down and stared at the dark until sleep took me in pieces. Morning came clear and sharp. The cold had stripped the sky clean. I pulled on boots and stepped outside, more curious than afraid. The snow around the cabin was untouched except for a wide set of tracks. They weren't snowmobile treads. I had seen enough to know the difference. These were uneven, almost staggered, like something heavy had been dragged on runners that didn't match. The impressions were deep in some places and shallow in others. They circled the cabin 3 times, just like the sound had. The spacing changed as they went, sometimes tight, sometimes wide, as if whoever made them had sped up and slowed down without care. The tracks ended at the front door. Not near it. Not passing by. They stopped with the last impression pressed right up against the threshold. There was no continuation. No turn away. No loop back toward the lake or the trees. Just a hard stop. I walked the full circle, slow and careful, looking for where they picked up again. They didn't. The snow was clean beyond that point. No wind scouring. No drift covering anything. The surface was crusted and sharp, every old mark preserved. Whatever had made those tracks had come in, gone around the cabin, and ended at my door. I checked the door. Locked. No marks on the wood. No scratches. No sign anyone had tried to get in. The handle was cold enough to sting. I spent the next hour trying to explain it. The engine sound fit a snowmobile, sort of. The tracks didn't. I thought about homemade rigs, sleds bolted to frames, old machines modified with junk parts. My uncle had told stories about people up here making do with whatever they had. I thought about someone checking cabins during the off-season, looking for fuel or tools. I thought about someone lost, circling for light. None of it explained the lack of a return trail. I walked out onto the lake, following the tracks backward from where they first appeared. They came straight across the ice from the far shore. Halfway out, they grew faint, then vanished where the ice had been scoured bare by wind days earlier. There was no snow to hold a mark there. On the far side, the tracks resumed, cutting in from the trees. Whoever it was had come from land, crossed the lake, and approached the cabin head-on. I stood there a long time, staring at the blank ice, trying to picture how someone could approach my door and then disappear without leaving a trace. Then I noticed something else. Near the door, mixed in with the last set of impressions, were scuffed marks. Boot soles. Not clear prints, but enough to tell someone had stepped off whatever they were using. The scuffs went right up to the door and stopped. There were no scuffs leading away. The answer settled in slow and ugly. The tracks didn't stop because the person vanished. They stopped because the machine did. Whoever came here had approached on some kind of improvised sled, cut the engine, stepped off, and then left by lifting the sled and carrying or dragging it back the way they came, staying in their own tracks. The scuffed snow at the door showed where they dismounted. The lack of new marks meant they had been careful, methodical, and close enough to see what they were doing. I followed the track line again, this time looking for disturbances inside the impressions. In several places, the edges were broken inward, as if weight had been shifted or something had been dragged backward along the same path. It was subtle, but once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. The sound I heard made sense now. The uneven pitch. The scraping. The slow circles. Someone had been testing the cabin, watching it, listening to me move inside. They had cut the engine when they were done. I packed fast. I didn't eat. I didn't clean. I loaded the sled, locked the door out of habit, and left before the sun cleared the trees. I didn't look back. The walk to the road felt longer than it had the day before. Every sound in the forest pulled my attention sideways. Later, I told myself it was a local checking cabins. I told myself they'd heard me inside and backed off. I told myself the careful retreat meant they didn't want trouble. All of that could be true. What I couldn't ignore was the fact that someone had come to my door in the middle of the night, stood there long enough to leave marks, and left only after making sure I knew they had been there. The tracks weren't careless. They were deliberate. They showed me the path in. They showed me the stop at the door. They hid the way out. I never went back. My uncle sold the place a few years later. I didn't ask who bought it. I still think about that lake sometimes, flat and empty, and how easy it was to cross without being seen. Winter 2016 stays sharp in my memory because of how clean everything looked and how wrong it felt to be scared in a place that open. There were 6 of us on snowshoes moving through a state forest that none of us knew well. The snow had fallen 2 days earlier, heavy and dry, enough to smooth the ground into a single white surface with no contrast. The sky stayed flat and pale, the kind of cold light that makes depth hard to judge. Sound behaved strangely there. Sometimes it carried too far. Sometimes it vanished. We were not inexperienced. We dressed right, packed food, marked our route on a GPS unit and a paper map. The plan was simple: follow an old logging trail, cut across a frozen marsh, loop back before dark. One friend moved faster than the rest of us. He always did. He volunteered to go ahead and check the marsh edge where the trail became unclear. He left with a steady pace, not rushing, just stretching his legs. We watched him shrink between the trees until his jacket became a bright spot, and then nothing at all. The forest felt quiet after that, not silent, just muted. Snow absorbed everything. Our breathing and the scrape of plastic frames under our feet became the loudest things around us. I remember noticing how evenly spaced our tracks were, 6 lines pressed into the powder, each one clean and sharp. The cold made my nose burn. Sweat gathered at my lower back and then chilled. We kept moving. No one spoke. We did not need to. The trail markers were old and partly buried. The GPS lagged in the cold. We slowed down, scanning trunks, checking the compass, adjusting our line to keep the marsh on our left. 10 minutes passed. Maybe a little more. Time stretches in the cold. It becomes something you feel in your fingers instead of something you count. The sound came from behind us. It was his voice. I knew it right away. It carried my friend's tone, his rhythm, the way his words usually rose and fell when he was out of breath. It sounded urgent and strained. The sound cut across the stillness and landed right between my shoulder blades. My first thought was that he had fallen into a drift or twisted an ankle. My second thought followed so fast it felt like the same one, and that thought was that the voice came from the wrong direction. We had been moving forward the whole time. Our tracks showed it. The sound came from somewhere we had already passed through, deeper in the trees, not from the open marsh ahead. No one answered. That part has stayed with me. We froze in place. 6 sets of snowshoes stopped mid-step, 6 bodies tense. I do not remember deciding not to respond. It felt automatic, like the way you pull your hand away from a hot surface before you know it is hot. Something about the sound felt off. It was panicked but flat at the same time, like it had been stretched thin. It carried too evenly, without breaking on the trunks around us. The forest did something strange then. The wind moved high above us, bending branches that never touched the ground. Snow sifted down in slow curtains. The voice came again, same place, same urgency, not closer, not farther. It did not match the way sound usually travels when someone is running or struggling. It felt placed. I looked down at the tracks behind us. 6 lines, clear and untouched. No sign of anyone turning back. No broken crust. No spray of powder. The cold sharpened my vision. I could see individual needles frozen into the snow. Nothing had moved through there since we passed. Fear did not arrive as a rush. It came as a tightening. My jaw locked. My breathing went shallow. I became aware of how far we were from the car, how fast daylight fades in winter. The voice stopped as suddenly as it started. The quiet returned, heavier than before. We did not speak. We did not look at each other. We started moving again, faster now, staying close, keeping the marsh on our left. I checked the GPS again. The arrow jittered and then steadied. We were on track. The logic of that helped a little. Another 10 minutes passed. The trees thinned. The land opened into a low white stretch where reeds poked through ice. Ahead of us, right where the map said the trail should pick up again, our friend stood waiting. He was upright, balanced, his snowshoes planted neatly. He looked fine. Not winded. Not injured. He raised an arm when he saw us, a simple motion, like he had been expecting us to come into view. Relief hit hard enough to make me dizzy. My shoulders dropped. My hands started shaking. I remember thinking that cold does that sometimes when the tension releases. We closed the distance. His face showed confusion when he saw all of us together instead of spread out. He looked past us once, back toward the trees. He had not turned around. His tracks led straight from where we last saw him to where he stood now. They were single, clean, uninterrupted. There was no loop, no backtrack. He had been ahead of us the entire time. We took a break there, out of the wind, near the marsh edge. We ate, drank, checked fingers and toes. The sky had not changed. The light stayed flat. The quiet pressed in again, but now it felt watched, like a held breath. Our friend showed no sign of distress. He had not fallen. He had not been stuck. He had not called out. That fact sat between us like a solid object. Later, after we moved on and finished the loop without further incident, the pieces came together in a way that left no comfort. Our friend had experienced his own strange sounds while waiting. He had heard noise from the trees on the far side of the marsh. It had the shape of human activity without clear words. It rose and fell in waves. It felt close and then distant. It did not approach. It did not retreat. He stayed put because the sound did not match the direction he expected us to come from. The explanation, when it formed, did not rely on anything outside the ordinary world. The forest sat on uneven ground with shallow gullies hidden under snow. Wind moved through the canopy at a steady speed while the air at ground level stayed almost still. Cold air pooled low. Sound bent. It traveled along those temperature layers and through those channels, carrying voices farther than expected and bending their direction. The marsh acted like a flat reflector, throwing noise back toward the trees we had already passed. Our own movement, our laughter earlier in the day, our breathing and gear noise, all of it could have been caught and reshaped, delayed and returned in fragments. The human brain fills gaps fast, especially when tired and cold. There was also the simple fact of stress. Winter travel demands attention. The body stays keyed up. When something breaks pattern, the mind reaches for meaning. We had known our friend was ahead. When a voice appeared behind us, the brain forced the sound into that shape. Once that idea took hold, every uneven echo fit it. None of that changed how it felt in the moment. None of it softened the memory of hearing someone we trusted call for help from a place he could not be. None of it erased the image of 6 untouched tracks leading forward while fear pulled us back. We finished the hike before dark. We reached the car. We drove home. Life went on. But every winter since, when snow deadens the ground and the air turns dense and strange, I remember how easily the familiar can be twisted by terrain, weather, and expectation. I remember how quickly the mind can place a human voice where it does not belong. I remember how the forest did not need anything unnatural to make us stop cold and listen to nothing. My name is Merrick. I grew up in a concrete apartment block built in the 70s, the kind thrown up fast and cheap, meant to last just long enough for no one to complain. By 2006, it was already crumbling. The stairwells smelled of damp coats and boiled cabbage. The walls held the cold like stone. Winter arrived early and stayed late. Snow packed into corners and never melted. The radiators hissed and knocked all night, except for the one above us. The man upstairs never turned on his heat. Everyone noticed. From the courtyard, you could see his windows even from a distance because they were always white. Not fogged. Frosted solid. Patterns of ice spread across the glass from the inside, thick as lace. Other apartments glowed yellow at night. His stayed dark. Sometimes a faint blue from the streetlights touched the ice, but no lamp ever came on. I lived with my mother then. My father had died years earlier. We shared the smallest unit on the 4th floor. The man upstairs lived directly above my bedroom. I do not know his name. No one did. He moved in sometime before the winter started. No moving truck. No furniture carried in. One day the mailbox slot had a new number written in pencil. That was all. At exactly 1:17 every night, the sound began. Not footsteps. Not furniture being moved. Something heavy dragged across his floor in one straight motion, stopped, then again. Slow. Deliberate. Always the same direction. The building amplified it. The vibration came through the ceiling into my bones. Plaster dust fell onto my desk. I checked the clock the first time because it woke me. After that, I checked to confirm I was not imagining the pattern. I was not. The noise lasted several minutes. It never changed pace. It never stopped early or went long. When it ended, there was silence. No coughing. No radio. No water running. Just the distant hum of the city and the wind pressing against the building. At first I thought it was furniture, a wardrobe being shifted back and forth. Then I thought maybe he worked nights and dragged something heavy when he came home. The time never changed, even on weekends, even during snowstorms, even when the rest of the building lost heat for a night and everyone complained. His windows stayed frozen. The stairwell outside his door always felt colder than the others. The paint was peeling in wide strips. The bulb flickered. Sometimes frost crept down the wall from the frame of his door. I noticed it once when I went up to check the fuse box for our floor. The metal handle burned my skin when I brushed it by accident. By mid-December, the sound felt closer. Not louder, heavier. The drag pressed longer against the ceiling before moving on. My bed vibrated. Dust shook loose. I lay awake every night waiting for it, counting my breaths, staring at the shadow of the window frame. The predictability made it worse. There was no relief in knowing when it would happen. I started paying attention to other details. No trash ever appeared outside his door. No footprints in the snow near his window ledge. The frost patterns never melted, not even on warmer days. When the sun hit the building, every other window cleared. His stayed white. Then one night, the sound did not come. I woke at 1:20 and felt my stomach drop. I waited. Nothing. The silence felt wrong, like a held breath that never released. I stayed awake until morning. The next night, nothing again. And the next. A week passed. The cold sharpened. Pipes burst somewhere in the building. Then another. Water leaked through ceilings. The stairwell filled with the smell of rust and wet concrete. Notices appeared taped near the entrance, printed and crooked. Maintenance was coming to check the upper floors. The door upstairs was forced open in the afternoon while I was homesick from school. I did not hear shouting. I heard metal tools clatter and the dull thud of boots. Later, water stopped dripping through our bathroom light fixture. The building quieted. That evening, I went upstairs. The door to his apartment was open. Inside was bare. No furniture. No bed. No clothes. No dishes. The walls were stained with long dark marks where moisture had frozen and thawed. The air smelled old and dry. The radiator was there but disconnected, valves closed, dust thick on the fins. It had not been used in years. The floor was what held my attention. The boards were stripped of varnish in a single long path that ran from one end of the apartment to the other. Not random scuffs. A clean channel, worn down to raw wood. The grain was smoothed and darkened by friction. At both ends, the boards were gouged deeper, as if something heavy had been turned around again and again in the same spots. I stood there longer than I should have. There were no personal items left behind. No sign anyone had packed. It looked like a place that had never been lived in, except for that path. In the days that followed, information settled into place without anyone explaining it to me directly. Notices were updated. A maintenance report was posted near the elevator, listing burst pipes caused by prolonged freezing in an unheated unit. A date was written beside it. The same week the sound stopped. I began remembering small things I had ignored. A figure once seen from a distance in the courtyard at night, hunched, moving slowly. A shape on the stairs early one morning, paused between floors, resting. The absence of trash. The absence of visitors. The way the sound never varied, never rushed, never hesitated. The path on the floor told the rest. He had not been moving furniture. He had been moving himself. Later records made it clearer. A body had been found days before the pipes burst, not in the apartment, but near an abandoned factory several blocks away. Exposure. Severe malnutrition. Damage to the legs consistent with prolonged injury. The timing matched. The address was listed as unknown. I understood then what I had been hearing. A man too cold to sleep, too stiff to walk properly, dragging himself across the floor to keep blood moving, back and forth along the only clear space. The time was fixed because his body followed a routine. Pain woke him. Movement kept him alive for another day. The frost on the windows came from breath freezing on glass. The silence came when he no longer made it back upstairs. The building did not change after that. The apartment was resealed. Someone new moved in months later. The floors were replaced. The sound never returned. I still wake some nights before 1:17. The ceiling is quiet. The heat knocks and hisses. I remind myself of what I know. There was no mystery, no unseen presence. Just a man who endured the cold until his body failed, wearing his own path into the floor because no one noticed him soon enough. That is the part that stays with me. Not the sound, but how easily it fit into the noise of the building. How long it took for anyone to check. How empty a place can look after someone has used every bit of himself just to survive one more night. December 2002 felt heavier than other winters I remember. The ice storm came in the afternoon and took everything with it. Power lines sagged, then went dark. The house lost heat by evening. By night, the cold settled into the walls. My parents dragged mattresses into the living room near the fireplace, but the chimney barely pulled. My brother and I were sent to our bedroom because it held heat better with the door closed. We wore layers to bed. I was 12 and tried to act calm. He was 9 and fell asleep fast, curled tight, breathing through his mouth. The wind scraped the siding all night. Ice kept falling from the trees in loud cracks that sounded like something breaking inside the house. I woke up often. The dark felt thick. I remember watching the window glow faintly from snow reflecting the moon. At some point the room changed. The air shifted. I opened my eyes and saw my brother standing beside his bed. His posture was loose, arms hanging, head tilted forward. He did not look at me. His eyes were open but flat. He had never sleepwalked before. He had night terrors when he was younger, but nothing like this. I whispered his name out of habit, then stopped. My voice sounded wrong in the cold. He took a step toward the door. I sat up and watched him open it without noise. The hallway was darker and colder. I waited a second, hoping he would turn around. He did not. I followed him. The house felt abandoned. No lights. No heat. The floors were ice cold through my socks. He moved carefully but without hesitation, like he knew where he was going. He passed the living room and the front door. He reached the back door and opened it. I rushed forward, afraid he would fall down the steps. He stepped outside barefoot. The cold outside hit like a wall. My breath burned. Snow had drifted up to my knees. The yard was unbroken, smooth except for the path he started to make. I followed him without thinking. My feet went numb fast. The snow squeaked with every step. He walked straight toward the trees at the edge of the property. The woods looked black and deep, branches bowed with ice. He stopped at the tree line. He leaned forward slightly, shoulders relaxed. His head tilted as if listening. He lowered his voice and said that it was warm under the snow. He said it like a fact, not like a thought. The words scared me more than the cold. I grabbed his arm. His skin felt warm, wrong against the air. He resisted without waking, pulling toward the trees with steady strength. I wrapped both arms around his chest and dragged him backward. He stumbled but did not fall. His feet scraped the snow. I remember thinking that if he broke skin, he would freeze. I kept pulling until we reached the house. I shoved the door open and pushed him inside. He went limp then, like a switch flipped. I guided him back to bed. He lay down and slept. I did not sleep again. In the morning the storm had passed. The power was still out. The house was quiet in a different way. My parents were tired and distracted. I did not tell them right away. I put on boots and went outside alone. The yard showed our tracks clearly, 2 lines through the snow leading to the trees. Near the edge of the woods, the snow looked wrong. There were shallow depressions, oval shapes pressed into the ground. The snow there was thinner. In some spots the ground showed through, dark and wet. Steam did not rise, but the earth looked recently warm. I stood there for a long time. The depressions were about the size of a person lying down. There were several close together. The edges were soft, not sharp like footprints. I touched the ground with a glove and felt moisture, not ice. The rest of the yard was frozen solid. I told my parents. My father came out and studied the area. He said it was probably deer bedding. He said animals lie down together in storms and their body heat melts the snow. He pointed out flattened leaves under the snow, old from fall, acting like insulation. He said the ice storm weighed the branches down and trapped heat close to the ground. He said it made sense. My mother focused on my brother. She asked him if he remembered anything. He did not. He ate breakfast and complained about cold feet. She watched him closely for days. She made him sleep in socks. She kept the doors locked. She said stress can make kids do strange things. She blamed the storm, the dark, the cold. A week later the power came back. Life moved on. School reopened. The yard refroze. The depressions hardened and disappeared under new snow. My brother never sleepwalked again. Years passed. We grew up. He does not remember that night at all. I remember everything. When I was older, I looked it up. Sleepwalking runs in families. It can be triggered by lack of sleep, stress, cold, changes in routine. Children do it more than adults. They can perform complex actions without awareness. They can talk. They can seek warmth. I learned about snow insulation, how deep snow can hold heat from the ground, how animals use leaf litter to stay warm, how deer beds look like shallow human shapes when the snow melts unevenly. I went back to the house once as an adult. The yard was smaller than I remembered. The tree line closer. The woods thinner. The ground near the trees dipped slightly, a natural low spot where leaves collect. I could see how snow would drift there and melt first. I could see how heat from packed leaves and animal bodies could soften the ground during a storm. Nothing about it breaks the rules of the world. A child walked in his sleep during a blackout. Animals sheltered near the trees. Snow melted unevenly. Fear filled the gaps. What stays with me is not the idea of something waiting in the woods. It is the memory of following my brother into the cold, of how easily a normal night turned dangerous, of how close we came to losing him to exposure because of a simple, documented condition. The ground was warm under the snow because life was huddled there trying to survive the storm. That knowledge does not make the memory lighter, but it makes it complete. Winter 1999 sat heavy in my memory long before I understood why. I was 14, sent away because my parents believed cold air and pine trees fixed things. The retreat lived in a bowl of mountains, cabins spread in a loose grid that looked organized from a distance and careless up close. Snow pressed everything flat. Sound traveled far and then vanished. I learned the place by walking it during daylight, counting steps, noticing how the woods swallowed paths once you stepped off them. Cabin 14 sat beyond the others, not far in miles but far in feel. The path bent away from the grid and dipped, then rose again through thicker trees. The counselor who walked us there used the word quieter, which felt true because the wind died near the cabin and the forest stood close, trunks packed tight. Smoke stains climbed the chimney like old bruises. The building smelled of wet wood and cleaner layered on top of it. The floor dipped near the back wall. The bunks were mismatched. Nails showed where nails should not show. Maps were posted in the main lodge. I looked at them because I liked to know where I was. Cabin 14 never appeared. I assumed it was an oversight. Adults forgot details. I learned that early. The first night dropped fast. Cold locked in after sunset, the kind that made breath loud. I lay on my bunk, staring at knots in the ceiling boards. The walls ticked as the temperature fell. Somewhere a tree cracked. Those sounds felt normal. What did not feel normal came later. 3 knocks landed on the outside wall, slow and spaced, firm enough to shake dust from the seams. They came from the side with the woods pressed close. The sound carried through the studs like someone using their knuckles on a door. After a pause, the same pattern hit the back wall, then the front. 3 knocks, move, 3 knocks, move. The rotation never changed. My body went still. I listened to breath around me and the scrape of blankets. No one spoke. I counted between the knocks because counting kept me from thinking. I waited for a voice, for laughter, for the scrape of boots on the steps. Nothing followed the knocks except more knocks. When it stopped, the quiet felt wrong, like the air had been thinned. I lay awake until the dark shifted to a dull blue and the cabin woke with the morning cold. Outside, snow lay clean and untouched. No prints circled the building. The drifts near the walls sat smooth, even where the knocks had landed hard enough to shake the siding. The counselor arrived with the same walk as before. He checked the door frame and the window latches with quick movements. He scanned the tree line and then looked down at the snow. His eyes moved too fast to be casual. He told us animals came close at night in winter and left it there. He did not step far from the cabin before turning back toward the main lodge. The second night the knocks returned. They began later, when the cold felt sharper. 3 knocks, pause, move. The sound had weight. It did not scrape or slide. It landed. The rotation circled the cabin twice before stopping. The door handle did not rattle. No windows were tested. The pattern felt deliberate in a way that animals never feel. In the morning, the snow stayed perfect. The counselor checked the same things. His jaw looked tight. He spent longer outside, walking the perimeter with long strides that cut shallow tracks. Then he brushed those tracks away with his boot near the walls. I noticed because I watched small details when fear needed a job. The third night brought the same pattern and a change. Halfway through the rotation, someone reached for the door. The latch clicked under a hand that shook. The counselor came from nowhere and drove that person back into the room with force that did not match a simple correction. A head hit a bunk. Deep met wood. Blood showed bright even in low light. The counselor pinned the person and held him there until the knocking stopped. The grip left bruises that turned dark by morning. After that, the rule came down without explanation. The door stayed locked after dusk. No one touched it. No one went near the windows. The counselor stayed inside at night, sitting on a chair by the door. He did not sleep. The knocks came 2 more nights. Always 3. Always slow. Always rotating. They stopped the same way, clean and final. Mornings brought smooth snow and a counselor who looked older each day. He walked us back to the main lodge at sunrise and kept us there until late afternoon, then returned us to cabin 14 with food and blankets. The path never changed. The woods never showed signs of use beyond our own. I learned about the fire by accident. In the main lodge, a framed photo hung crooked near the stairwell. It showed the retreat years earlier, thinner cabins and fewer trees. A caption dated the picture. The spot where cabin 14 stood held a black scar in the snow. The building did not exist in the image. I checked the date again. It predated my stay by a decade. I found another photo in an album left open on a table. The same scar appeared. A handwritten note mentioned a winter fire and a loss that ended the season early. I went to the office when no one watched. Old permits sat in a drawer, curled in yellow. One listed a cabin number that ended at 13. Another noted a structure removed after damage. The date matched the fire. I put the papers back and washed my hands because they smelled like dust and oil. The explanation arrived in pieces that fit once they touched. The retreat leased land. Beyond the grid lay property lines that mattered to people with money and to people who wanted things left alone. After the fire, the cabin should have been gone. Instead, someone rebuilt a shell on the old pad, rough and cheap, not meant to last. It did not go on maps because it was not supposed to be there. It sat close to a boundary used by locals who cut corners in winter, setting traps where they should not set them, moving gear at night because daylight brought questions. The knocks were checks. 3 knocks carried through with better than a shout and did not carry far. Rotating the sides told someone inside that a perimeter was being walked, that the cabin was occupied, that a route needed to change. The absence of tracks came from care and time. Snow hides effort if you know how to erase it. A branch dragged low leaves clean lines that wind smoothed by morning. Boots brushed away the last marks near walls where eyes look first. The counselor knew because he had to know. He sat by the door because if someone opened it at the wrong time, a bad meeting would happen. He used force because fear makes men choose speed over kindness. He stayed because leaving would draw attention. The cabin existed to be quiet. We were part of that quiet. The final night came with a storm that piled snow against the windows. The knocks came once, a single rotation, then stopped early. In the morning, the counselor walked us back and did not return. Cabin 14 stayed behind, a shape already fading as snow filled the path. Weeks later, I heard the retreat closed early that year. An inspection found unauthorized structures. A boundary dispute surfaced. Fines followed. I never saw the place again. Years later, I checked updated maps. The grid ended at 13. The scar showed faint and then not at all. I keep winter close now. I notice patterns. I do not open doors when the night tests them. I learned that fear does not need ghosts. It needs people, cold, and a reason to knock. January 2021 had been quiet in a way that felt false. Snow had been falling since early afternoon, thick and dry at first, then heavier as the temperature dropped. I was delivering groceries because hours had been cut at my regular job. Snowstorms paid better. People tipped more when they felt guilty about staying warm inside while someone else drove for them. I needed the money and I trusted my car more than I should have. By the time I accepted the order that sent me there, the sky had turned flat and colorless. The kind of gray that eats depth. The address sat at the edge of a small town I didn't know. The GPS line looked clean and simple, a short route cutting through what it labeled as a county road. The main highway route added 15 minutes. I chose the shortcut without thinking. The plowed road ended fast. The county road narrowed and curved into trees. Snow sat untouched, smooth as cloth. Tire tracks vanished behind me within seconds. I kept going because the GPS kept talking, and because stopping felt worse than moving. The headlights showed nothing past a short tunnel. Branches leaned over the road and caught flakes, dumping them in soft bursts. About half a mile in, the car lost grip. The engine whined, and the tires spun without sound. I tried rocking it back and forth. Snow packed tight around the wheels. I stepped out and the cold hit hard. The air burned my throat. The silence felt thick. Snow muted everything. Even the wind sounded far away. I shoveled with my hands until my fingers went numb. It didn't help. The car sank deeper. I checked my phone. 1 bar. The map froze and then recalculated, still insisting this was the fastest route. I turned the engine off to save fuel. The quiet pressed in. That was when I noticed the light. It wasn't bright. It sat low between the trees, steady and yellow, like a porch light seen from far away. It didn't flicker. It didn't move. It looked close enough to reach in a few minutes. I told myself there had to be a house back there. Someone lived on this road. Someone had power. I locked the car out of habit and started walking. Snow came up to my calves. Each step took effort. My breath came out loud and fast. The light stayed where it was. I walked for several minutes, and it didn't grow. The trees thinned and then closed again. I checked over my shoulder, and my car was already hard to see, a dark shape swallowed by white. I kept going because turning back felt like admitting something had gone wrong. That was when I heard footsteps behind me. They weren't rushed. They weren't heavy. They crunched in the same rhythm as mine. When I slowed, they slowed. When I took longer steps, the sound stretched with me. I told myself it was an echo. Snow does strange things to sound. I stopped completely. The footsteps stopped. I stood there with my heart pounding and the cold creeping up my legs. I turned around slowly, scanning the trees, the road, the snow behind me. There was nothing. No shape. No movement. Just my own footprints, a single line leading away from the car. I waited longer than felt reasonable. The light ahead stayed fixed. I turned back toward it and walked. The sound returned. It stayed several steps behind. Close enough to feel. Far enough to stay unseen. I tried to time it. I counted my steps in my head. The sound matched every count. My mouth went dry. My ears rang with blood. I stopped again. Silence. I turned faster this time, my body already tight. Still nothing. No breath. No shadow. The trees stood bare and thin. Snow clung to everything. I started back toward the car. The light didn't follow. It stayed exactly where it had been. It didn't dim. It didn't grow. It didn't react at all. As I walked away from it, the footsteps returned, still behind me, still matching. My pace picked up. So did the sound. Not louder. Just closer. Panic crept in slow and steady. My hands shook inside my gloves. I kept my eyes forward. I didn't want to turn again. I didn't want to see anything. I focused on the dark shape of my car, barely visible now. Each step felt wrong. Snow filled my boots. Cold soaked through my socks. Halfway back, I stopped one last time. The sound stopped. I turned, and there was still nothing there. I almost laughed from relief. The sound had to be my own steps bouncing back. My nerves were shot. I was tired. I was cold. I turned back and kept moving. That was when I noticed the second set of footprints. They ran alongside mine, offset just enough to be separate. They had appeared without sound. They were clear in the snow, pressed deep and uneven. They were barefoot, toes splayed, heels narrow. Skin had met snow directly. They matched my pace perfectly. I ran. Snow dragged at my legs and burned my lungs. The crunch behind me sped up without getting louder. I didn't look back. The car grew larger in front of me. My chest felt like it would split. I fumbled the keys and dropped them once before getting the door open. I threw myself inside and locked it. The sound stopped. I sat there shaking, heat off, breath fogging the windshield. I stared through the glass at the road. My footprints stopped at the driver's door. The other prints stopped beside them. They didn't circle the car. They didn't move away. They just ended. I started the engine and blasted the heater. The tires spun again, then caught. The car lurched free. I drove backward without turning around until the road widened. I didn't stop until I reached plowed pavement and lights. Later that night, I filed a report for a stranded vehicle recovery, saying nothing about the walk or the light or the footprints. A county truck towed the car the next morning. The driver said this stretch of road caused problems every winter. No houses stood past the first bend. No power lines. No reason for a light. I returned during the day out of a need I couldn't explain. The road looked smaller in daylight. The trees stood thin and quiet. There was no sign of footprints anymore. Snow had fallen again, smoothing everything flat. I walked to where the car had been stuck, and then a little farther. I found the place where I had stopped and turned around. The spot where the second prints had appeared. The ground dipped slightly there. A shallow drainage cut ran under the snow. Water flowed beneath, warmer than the air. In winter, heat rose and melted snow just enough to make a faint glow at night when headlights hit it right. The light had been my own reflection bending through trees and ice. A few yards away, near the edge of the road, I found a tarp half buried under snow. Beneath it lay discarded clothes, stiff and wet, and scraps of food wrappers. Someone had been living there. Someone without boots. Someone who followed travelers, hoping for help, warmth, or a ride. Someone careful enough to stop when watched. I reported it. The county cleared the camp days later. They told me a man had been found a mile down the road, alive but barely, suffering from severe frostbite and exposure. He had no boots when they found him. I stopped delivering during storms after that. I still think about how close those footprints were, how they kept pace without sound, how easy it would have been to turn around one more time and step off the road.